At the airport, U.S. Marine Mike says goodbye to his girlfriend Jenny before departing for a mission in North Africa. 3 months later, Mike and his spotter Tommy are stationed in the African desert, waiting on top of a cliff for their assassination target. Eventually, they spot two groups approaching from opposite directions. One group is traveling on foot, while the other is a convoy filled with armed vehicles. The groups converge in the middle, and Tommy, along with his commanding officer on the radio, urges Mike to take the shot. However, Mike hesitates, as it appears to be a heartwarming reunion between families, rather than a terrorist exchange. Mike soon realizes that it's a wedding, and his target is the father of the groom, who is standing behind the couple. He informs his commanding officer about the situation and receives orders to kill the groom in order to reach the target. Despite this, Mike refuses to execute a civilian and lies to his commanding officer, claiming that he has lost sight of the target. At that moment, a glare from the sniper scope reveals their position to the guards at the ceremony, who immediately open fire. Mike returns fire briefly before he and Tommy flee, as the guards rush to evacuate their boss. Some guards begin moving toward Mike and Tommy in their vehicles, forcing the duo to jump and roll down the hill. They take cover behind a rocky formation, and Tommy contacts their commanding officer for rescue. However, the GPS is malfunctioning, and they cannot pinpoint their exact location. With the enemy closing in, Mike fires at the hill to divert them. Suddenly, the enemies retreat when they notice a sandstorm approaching. Mike and Tommy decide to use the sandstorm as cover and walk through it. As Tommy makes another call, their commanding officer instructs them to head toward a village located 5 hours to the west. Eventually, the duo manages to make it out of the storm and continues walking under the scorching desert sun. Tommy talks constantly, sharing stories about his wife and son back home, but Mike remains quiet. Frustrated, Tommy points out that something is clearly bothering Mike and asks about Jenny, wondering if marriage is on Mike's mind. Mike admits he does want to marry her, but he can't just yet because things are complicated. Soon after, they receive a message on the radio stating that the main team has encountered complications and a new pickup spot has been chosen. This means the duo must cross the desert to reach it. Due to the dunes, the radio signal will be unreliable, so they'll need to be extra cautious. After hours of walking, Mike and Tommy encounter the sandstorm again and stop to wait it out. They spot a man walking through the storm with a child at the end of a rope, but the man doesn't seem to notice them. The duo decides not to shoot. As the wind blows, a warning sign is knocked off its pole. Once the storm clears, Tommy and Mike continue walking under the intense sun. Suddenly, the warning sign lands right at Mike's feet. Though Mike can't read it, the skull symbol clearly signals danger. He recalls that the U.S. military buried numerous landmines in this area. However, Tommy brushes it off, thinking Mike is overreacting. He explains that it's just a trick from the locals to keep enemies away from their villages. Tommy also points out that turning back would mean dying of thirst, so he continues walking confidently, believing the sign indicates the village is close. After a few more hours of walking, Mike freezes when he steps on something. It's just a little toy soldier. He places it in his vest before noticing that Tommy has run out of water. Mike shares his own, desperate to keep up the mood. Tommy, trying to lighten things, begins walking backward while teasing Mike for overthinking everything. Suddenly, a sharp click is heard, and Mike tries to warn Tommy, but it's too late. Tommy takes another step, and a landmine explodes. Mike's ears ring from the blast. He steps forward toward Tommy only to hear another click. Frozen in shock, Mike realizes he's standing on top of a landmine and can't move without triggering it. Once the sand from the explosion clears, Mike sees that Tommy has survived, but he's lost both his legs. Tommy screams in pain, begging for help. Mike yells back to try to calm him down and explains the situation. Guided by Mike's instructions, Tommy attempts to reach his bag with the radio, but the pain is unbearable. His mood worsens when he looks down and sees that his legs are gone, causing him to panic. Mike reassures him by reminding him of his family and the medicine injections they carry in their vests. Tommy immediately takes both injections, ignoring Mike's advice to save one for later. Then Tommy tries reaching for the bag again, and this time successfully grabs it. Unfortunately, the radio isn't working. Desperate, Mike considers stepping away from the landmine, reasoning that it might be old and broken. However, the risk is high, and Tommy urges him to stay put and live. Mike takes out his gun, and in a moment of despair, Tommy asks Mike to send his love to his son before ending his life. Mike yells in frustration and grief, but he quickly stops himself, realizing that panicking could make him fall. Mike starts carefully lowering his body, eventually kneeling and using his knife to gently move the sand. Beneath his foot, he finds a round metal object, confirming that he's standing on top of a landmine. Unbeknownst to Mike, a man is watching them from afar, but leaves without offering help. Mike then ties his shoelaces, the strap from his gun, and his vest to create a hook. He throws it several times, attempting to grab the bag, but it doesn't reach far enough. Moving carefully again, Mike stands up and nearly falls when throwing the hook, but he manages to recover just in time. Finally, he succeeds in dragging the bag toward him, only to discover that the radio's battery is dead. The spare radio battery is in Tommy's vest, but luckily, the radio can be powered by the sun. Mike places the small solar panel on the ground to charge it. He keeps himself busy by going over his supplies, and after a few hours, the radio finally charges. Mike contacts his commanding officer, explaining the situation and requesting extraction. However, the officer isn't happy about the failed mission. Since Mike doesn't have GPS and is already gravely injured, he isn't considered a high priority. The helicopters can't fly due to the sandstorms, so Mike will have to wait 52 hours for a convoy to pick him up. Mike isn't sure he can survive that long, but he has no other choice. So he starts a timer on his watch. The commanding officer also reminds him that many mines are old and broken, and there's a trench technique that could help him survive the situation. However, before the officer can explain further, the communication cuts off. A few hours later, Mike eats some of his rations, realizing he doesn't have much left. Suddenly, the sandstorm approaches again, and Mike quickly covers his face, grabs his gear, and bends over to remain as still as possible against the wind. His body trembles, but he remains strong and manages to get through it without triggering the landmine. When the storm finally passes, Mike looks around and discovers that the wind has blown Tommy's body right next to him. After covering his friend's face with his hat, Mike opens Tommy's vest pocket and finds a picture of Tommy's family. He takes a moment of silence, then puts it back and grabs the battery. Unfortunately, the wind has blown the bag too far, and Mike can't access the radio anymore. The depressing irony of the situation makes Mike laugh. As time passes, he can't do anything but wait. He covers his head to protect it from the sun and drinks the last drop of water. Desperate, he shoots a few rounds into the sky and yells for help, but no one responds. He begins to consider suicide as his only option. Just then, he sees a Berber man walking by. Mike points his gun at him and orders him to stop, but the man ignores him and keeps walking. Thinking the man doesn't speak English, Mike makes explosion noises to indicate that this is a landmine area, but the Berber simply mocks him. The Berber man starts walking toward Mike in a zigzag pattern. Suddenly, he asks why Mike is stuck, revealing that he understands English. Mike explains the situation and continues asking for water and the radio. However, the Berber mocks him for not moving, takes his flask, but doesn't help with the radio. Instead, he just leaves, ignoring Mike's shouting and questioning whether his strange movements help him avoid mines. Hours later, Mike forces himself to pee into a bag to drink. He barely takes a sip before a little girl appears, running toward him in the same zigzag pattern. She gives him her flask full of water, and Mike drinks, guessing she's the Berber man's daughter. The girl then pulls out a toy soldier from her bag, and Mike shows her the one he found earlier. Without saying a word, she uses both toy soldiers to represent him and Tommy. She pushes the toys forward, signaling that Mike needs to move on. Mike responds that he can't move and starts yelling for the radio without meaning to. The girl simply leaves. Later, as the sun begins to set, Mike plays some songs on his phone and starts a fire. He hears animals howling in the distance and distracts himself by looking at pictures of Jenny on his phone. He watches a special video she made for his departure as a good luck charm. Eventually, the fire dies down, and Mike falls asleep while glancing at his watch. His father suddenly appears in front of him and punches him, triggering a memory of the abuse Mike suffered as a child. This causes Mike to wake up just before he falls. Mike tries to restart his fire, but at that moment, he hears the growling of wild dogs drawing closer. He begins shooting in the dark, but none of his bullets hit. Deciding to risk using the flashlight, Mike discovers that one of the wild dogs is dragging Tommy's bag away, while another dog is walking toward him. After switching guns, he opens fire again, wounding one of the dogs. As the creature steps back, it activates a landmine, and the resulting explosion scares the rest of the pack away. The next day, the Berber man visits Mike again, calling him a lucky man for surviving so far. The Berber explains that he doesn't know where the landmines are and simply walks like that to increase his chances of avoiding them. He suggests that Mike is afraid to move on physically because he hasn't moved on emotionally, and then asks why Mike became a soldier. Mike answers that he had no reason to stay anymore. This time, the Berber man brings over the radio, and Mike quickly changes the battery, but it still doesn't work. The Berber then grabs Mike's face and tells him to be a free man. This causes Mike to hallucinate, seeing the Berber as Tommy, who urges him to live. But when Mike blinks, the Berber is gone, far away. A few hours later, Mike cuts his boot open because his foot is swollen and red. He also uses his knife to kill a scorpion. Eventually, the heat becomes unbearable, and Mike removes his vest, clearly affected mentally by the ordeal. He starts seeing hallucinations, interacting with them as if they were real. He yells at them, punches them, and shouts in frustration. Every time this happens, a clicking sound can be heard. He even sees Tommy's body standing up and announcing that they're going home, but it quickly disappears. In the evening, Mike continues trying to contact the base, but Tommy's hallucination reminds him that he's just wasting the battery. Then, Mike's phone starts ringing, and he sees that it's a call from his father. Tommy points out that it isn't real, and Mike snaps, pushing Tommy away. Tommy then tells him that this is happening because Mike never worked through his inner demons. Mike admits that leaving Jenny makes him as bad as his father, but Tommy reassures him he isn't. A flashback reveals that Mike had asked Jenny to marry him, but she turned him down because she also believed he needed to heal first. In the present, Mike almost falls asleep, but suddenly, the wild dogs return. They activate a landmine and move away from the explosion. However, this time, they don't leave. Mike shoots in the dark, but Tommy warns him to watch out. A dog then approaches from the side and bites Mike's arm. Mike shoots it, and Tommy convinces him to try the technique his commanding officer had mentioned. Desperately, Mike starts to dig in the sand, but the dogs jump on him, attacking and pushing him away before he can finish the trench. The landmine then explodes, injuring Mike as he falls. Mike blinks, realizing that the explosion was just a hallucination, but the dogs are really attacking him. Determined to survive, Mike fights back. Mike grabs his knife and begins to fight the dogs, one by one, despite suffering several bite wounds. As he struggles, his mind is consumed with memories of being punched in the past. By morning, all the dogs are dead, and Mike has managed to survive. At that moment, the radio finally activates. Mike learns that the convoy will be delayed due to an attack, and that he'll be picked up in 17 hours. Acknowledging that his chances of survival are slim, Mike is connected to Jenny. Immediately, he begins apologizing for ruining everything he touches while seeing her on the screen. Before Jenny can respond, the communication is cut off, and Mike finally passes out. He's caught by the Berber just in time, who starts applying ointment to his wounds. The Berber explains that a landmine took his leg, showing Mike his wooden prosthetic. He talks about how he was once terrified in the hospital, but a nurse's sympathy helped him keep going. Eventually, she became his wife. The Berber then makes Mike drink some medicine, warning him that it will ease his pain but worsen his hallucinations. Mike mentions the little girl, but the Berber reveals that he was the one who brought him the flask. He only has 3 sons now because his daughter died when the landmine took his leg. They used to gather landmines together to sell them, and the girl was particularly skilled at replacing the mines with old cans. The Berber believes that despite everything, he isn't as unlucky as Mike because he's learned to move on. Afterward, the Berber leaves, and Mike sees the little girl walking beside him. Suddenly, the effects of the medicine kick in, and Mike watches the walls of his childhood home emerge from the ground. He opens the door and sees his child's self, witnessing his father's extreme violence towards his mother. When his father notices him, he says he'll teach him to be a man and punches him too. The blow causes Mike to momentarily return to reality, but the flashbacks start again quickly, overwhelming him once more. Mike's mind oscillates between hallucinations and painful memories. He sees glimpses of a happy life with Jenny, but a clicking sound brings him back to a painful memory of his mother in the hospital bed. Mike had run away from home, leaving his mother with his violent father, which led to her hospitalization. Another memory flashes of Tommy and Mike at a bar where 2 men are harassing a waitress who turns out to be Jenny. In a fit of rage, Mike defends her, aggressively beating the men, filled with years of pain pent-up frustration. The hallucinations merge, and his father appears to punch him again. Mike's mind shifts back and forth between the desert and memories of his mother's death, weighed down by guilt. It's Tommy's voice that finally snaps him out of the hallucinations, warning him that the convoy is coming. A voice on the radio tries to reach Mike, but his dry throat barely allows him to respond. He waves his hand, but he's too far for anyone to see him. Tommy then reminds him of the smoke grenade, and Mike desperately reaches for it. But just as he's about to grab it, he's shot by an enemy hiding in the dunes. Bleeding and barely able to move, Mike, driven by thoughts of Jenny, grabs the smoke grenade, but another shot causes him to drop it. As Mike fires back, memories of his arguments with Jenny and their time together flood his mind. He runs out of bullets, and once again his father appears, reminding him of his unresolved trauma. Overwhelmed, Mike points his gun at his father, but then remembers Jenny's encouragement, deciding he wants to be a better person for her. He chooses not to shoot, embracing his father in a moment of catharsis. He remembers Jenny's comforting hug, finally starting to heal. The convoy is almost there, and with one final burst of willpower, Mike carefully steps away from the mine, remembering the Berber's words. To his shock, nothing happens. He digs up the mine, only to find it was one of the girl's cans all along. Inside, there's a toy soldier. Laughing in relief, Mike activates the smoke grenade just in time for the convoy to spot him and rescue him. Sometime later, after healing, Mike returns to the USA and reunites with Jenny, ready to start a better life together, free from his past.